Do you ever feel like something's wrong with you? Or maybe you feel fine, but the world seems wrong? In the past few years, I keep hearing people joke about how we're in the darkest timeline and how something just switched and now it's all going to hell and there's not a damn thing we can do to stop it. That's a sentiment everything, everywhere, all at once recognizes.
Something is off. Your clothes never wear as well the next day. Your hair never falls in quite the same way.
It's just part of our zeitgeist now. I don't know if I share that pessimism, but boy, I tell you, it's tempting some days. And it feels like there has to be some sort of explanation why insert bad thing is happening, but it always feels just out of my reach, somehow inaccessible to me. And I can't help but think about something else that's just out of my reach, the past. Generational trauma is the past affecting us in ways we will never be able to change and, frankly, may never fully understand. It's a little different everywhere you go. Tolstoy started Anna Karenina with the line,
"Happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way."
What he meant was, for a family to be happy, a lot of things have to go right. Good health, a roof over your head, you sort of like each other. And that means there's so many ways for things to go wrong. And where there's strife, there's a potential for trauma. And that trauma can present itself in a lot of different ways. Resentment, insecurity, distrust, anxiety, just to name a few. And any combination of these can have a big effect on a little kid and sometimes even follow them their whole life. And what if that kid turns out to be your parent? How's that going to affect you? And how would you even begin to understand where all these bad vibes are coming from? What if that's what feels nebulously wrong about the world to you? It's definitely out of your reach. Generational trauma was first studied in grandchildren of Holocaust survivors in 1966 by Dr. Vivian Rakoff. He found that grandchildren of Holocaust survivors were overrepresented in mental health clinics by 300%. The theory has since been applied to Indigenous, Black, and immigrant communities, and it's not even specific to certain racial or ethnic groups. Children of veterans with PTSD, 9/11 survivors, even survivors of natural disasters have all been studied and found that the effects of those events have rippled through future generations. It can happen to anyone. All these different potential causes of generational trauma mean that it's hyper-specific to the circumstances of our family's history. The two stories I want to talk about today are going to give us a bunch of different case studies for what generational trauma can look like and just how slippery it can be. Also, spoilers for both Everything Everywhere All at Once and Undone. Evelyn Kwan is stressed. She's planning a party tonight, she's being audited, her judgmental father's visiting her husband's divorcing her, and someone keeps putting googly eyes on all her stuff. All this has made her inconsiderate, closed off, and entirely unable to connect with her daughter.
You have to try and eat healthier. You are getting fat.
Said daughter, Joy, would like to bring her girlfriend to the party tonight so she can introduce her to the family. Given that her grandfather doesn't speak English and he's really traditional, it's a big deal, and it's going to require tact, thought, and love. Something that Evelyn is in short supply of.
好朋友，老友嚟㗎。Mom.
Nope, there's no time to support your gay daughter. It's off to the auditor's office. It's here in the elevator that we begin to see why this movie is about more than just taxes. Her husband, Waymond, typically the definition of mild-mannered, starts making some moves. He gives Evelyn some baffling instructions, and then blammo, he seems to remember nothing. Here comes the sci-fi. This movie takes place in the multiverse. No, not like that. Let's just not think about that right now. But yes, sort of. Evelyn is about to embark on a journey through every possible iteration of her existence. We'll watch her become a singer, a chef, a kung fu movie star, a sign spinner, a lady with hot dogs for hands. Nothing is off the table here. Because the multiverse is in danger. And this secret agent version of her husband, we'll come to call him Alpha Waymond, needs his beloved Evelyn. In the Alphaverse, Evelyn was a brilliant scientist who invented verse jumping, but her discovery came at a cost. She was murdered by a malevolent entity named Jobu Tabaki. Ever since, Jobu's been hopping through universes, killing Evelyns left and right and causing mayhem. Alpha Waymond believes that this Evelyn is the only one who can stop her because
You're capable of anything because you're so bad at everything.
It must be Evelyn that faces Jobu Tabaki, because it turns out Jobu is a version of Joy. In the Alphaverse, scientist Evelyn pushed her daughter to the edge of sanity while training her to jump verses. It was this crack in her psyche that led to Jobu Tabaki. And Jobu Tabaki is magnificent. Strutting into frame in a rhinestone suit, cigarette in one hand and pet pig in the other, her first line is spent, what else, talking back to a cop. She emphasizes her point by turning him into confetti. She takes another cop out of uniform and into a Chiquita Banana Lady-inspired Roomba costume. She, of course, is leading the dance as she Roombas him directly into the line of fire from his partner's gun. When the firing officer rushes her, she promptly pile-drives him into the ground. She is cruel, sure, but also, she's magnificent. When confronted with this hyper-violent version of her daughter, Evelyn can only say,
Why she thinks she is gay?
The homophobia takes Jobu by surprise.
You're still hung up on the fact that I like girls in this world.
When you've seen every iteration of every universe, intolerance must seem facile. Jobu takes this opportunity to show Evelyn what she's been building. The Everything Bagel. The Everything Bagel is the culmination of everything that's ever existed.
Everything. All my hopes and dreams, my old report cards, sesame, poppy seed, salt.
But also, it's just a really scary bagel. And to Jobu, it represents her truth.
Nothing matters.
This brings her peace.
Feels nice, doesn't it? If nothing matters, and all the pain and guilt you feel for making nothing of your life goes away.
This is nihilism, the philosophy that life is fundamentally meaningless. And it represents one side of the movie. Nihilist is darkness encircling light, and nihilism's hard to fight. Something that Alpha Gong Gong, an English-speaking version of Evelyn's father from the Alphaverse, who seems to be the general in the war against Jobu, knows well. His solution is to obliterate it. End Jobu by ending every version of his granddaughter, Joy. As you'd expect, Evelyn can't bring herself to kill her daughter, and instead insists that she can still save Joy from Jobu. Evelyn's found a reason to fight. To save her daughter from Jobu Tabaki's dark influence. To save her, she'll break the walls between herself and every other version of herself. She's a chef, she's a singer, she's a sign spinner, all at once. By the time she gets to Jobu, the barriers between herself and every other Evelyn are paper thin. With her newfound abilities, Evelyn challenges Jobu to a fight that takes place in all contexts. They are prisoner and guard, they're adversaries in a kung fu movie, they're piñatas, they're stick figures, they are mother and daughter. Experiencing all this at once, the silliness of this fight is impossible to ignore. They come to a détente. She asks Jobu why she's doing this, and Jobu agrees to show her. As they return to look at the Everything Bagel, Evelyn is confused. She doesn't care about the bagel.
Give me back my daughter and I'll leave you alone forever.
I am your daughter. Your daughter is me.
Of course, they're the same person. Jobu has experienced everything that Joy has.
I know the joy and the pain of having you as my mother.
The only difference between Jobu and the Joy Evelyn's referring to is that Jobu's experienced more. Jobu has, is, and will forever be experiencing everything, everywhere, all at once. And she's brought her mother here to the bagel to finish her transition, to dissolve any remaining barriers between her various existences. Once she's done that, Evelyn sees Jobu's point. The New Year's party she planned, her taxes, her marriage, none of it matters. This is the numbing bliss of nihilism. It's a powerful drug. It makes you feel invincible. Evelyn does the only sensible thing. She turns into a rock. It's nice, Evelyn says in black text. Everything feels really far away, Joy says in white text. Mother and daughter are finally able to talk as rocks. Evelyn tries to apologize, but Joy insists it's not necessary. And then she confesses the real reason she brought Evelyn into this impossible and overwhelming omni-existence. Here, I'll read it to you. I was hoping you'd see something I didn't. I was hoping you'd convince me there's another way.
You know why I actually built the bagel? It was to destroy myself. Like actually die.
Jobu built the bagel to end her own existence. And while Evelyn has failed to find a reason to convince Joy otherwise, Joy is comforted by the conclusion that they should obviously die together. But Evelyn's distracted. It's Waymond back at the New Year's party. He's trying to repair the damage Evelyn's done. Why would he bother? Doesn't he know everything's pointless? Well, kinda. In a universe loosely inspired by the tragic and beautiful Chinese romance In the Mood for Love, he explains his naivety.
这是一个很残酷的世界，我们都在里面绕圈子，这我明白。我总是看到事情好的一面，那不是因为我天真，而是必要和需要，这也就是我的生存之道。
He knows it's a cruel world. He isn't blind to pain. He makes the choice to be optimistic out of necessity. He sees himself as playing chess with the world's cruelty, and this is his strategy. In another universe, he echoes the idea.
The only thing I do know is that we have to be kind.
This convinces Evelyn. She turns away from the bagel, but Joy's not convinced.
Eventually, that all just goes away.
That love isn't eternal. You'll fight, you'll break up, it's not forever. That feeling of love eventually dying is felt most strongly by one of Jobu's most devoted followers, Deirdre, the IRS agent. She once knew love, but her husband left her. That rejection's a chip on her shoulder, but her survival is a sign of her strength.
It's called unlovable bitches like us. Make the world go round.
But Evelyn, now armed with Wayman's kindness, sees the flaw in this thinking.
You're not unlovable.
Even if you don't feel loved in this moment, it doesn't mean you're not unworthy of love. Evelyn places Wayman's googly eye on her forehead. This marks her as a warrior of kindness. Not black encircling white, but white encircling black. As a warrior of peace, Evelyn literally fights with kindness. She looks into the multiverse existence of each of her foes and finds their pain and provides them with some brief form of relief. A neck adjustment, a long dead wife's perfume, a fetish realized, all to chase Joy, to save her daughter. But Evelyn is stopped again. Because you'll always be human, and the world will always require more love than you can ever give, and something's going to stop you. Something like, for example, your own trauma. Evelyn left China when she was a young woman to follow Wayman to the US. Her father said if she left, he'd disown her. And she did. And yet here he is, visiting her in the US, and she's just afraid of what he thinks now as she was back then. We've already seen how her fears of his expectations have made her feel rejected and unloved, but Evelyn sees this now, and she knows it's time for a change. She will be the woman she wants to, without fear of her father's judgment. She's not going to let his expectations get in the way of accepting her daughter. And she begins by fixing a previous mistake.
阿爸，呢個係 Becky，阿 Joy 嘅女朋友。
Proudly, Evelyn introduces Joy's girlfriend to her father. Correctly, this time. This should be a moment of triumph for Evelyn and Joy, right? Joy can finally feel the love her mother desperately wants to give her now, right? No, Evelyn, you dummy, not even close. This confession only pushes Joy closer to the bagel. At the same time, Rockjoy rolls herself right off the cliff. To me, this represented Joy embracing defeat and nihilism over her mother, literally jumping off a cliff rather than accepting her love. And girl, I get it. Evelyn has spent Joy's entire life afraid of some unpleasable figure, and it affected her parenting. So much so that there exists a version of her that was willing to put so much pressure on her daughter to succeed that she was willing to break her daughter's brain. The strife between mother and daughter goes beyond just homophobia. It's permeated Joy's entire existence. Gong Gong's expectations warped Evelyn, and so Evelyn's expectations warped Joy. From Joy's perspective, the damage is done.
You're good for you. You're figuring your shit out.
It is great that Evelyn's begun a journey of personal healing, but are we just going to forget about the fat shaming?
You are getting fat.
I mean, sure, maybe she's accepted her sexuality, but what about every other fight they've had? After all, they don't really seem to like each other. And so Joy asks the question she's been wondering.
Why not go somewhere where your daughter is more than just this?
Why stay? Evelyn could be anywhere in the multiverse. She could be a movie star with wealth and fame. She could be a singer with a proud father. Rock Evelyn, who's been looking over the cliff watching her rock daughter fall, tumbles after her. In my opinion, this is her conceding that Joy has a point. It's true that nothing makes sense here, and life can feel pretty meaningless sometimes, and there's only small specks of light in the darkness. But even if they disagree, even if she thinks everything's meaningless, her mom still finds their time together meaningful. And as I watched the end of the film and saw the now unified family go into the auditor's office, tears came to my eyes and I felt deeply unsatisfied. Now, don't get me wrong. This movie slaps. It has so many totally different influences and wears them all on its sleeve. But they work together seamlessly in this delicious cosmic gumbo. And the performances are insane across the board. They reach into your chest and tear your heart right out and then kiss its little boo-boo better. It's amazing. I don't care that I've spoiled it for you. You'll still love it. I've watched it so many times, and I'd go watch it again right now, but I do have a video essay to finish. But something about this ending just didn't sit right. I just couldn't believe that one heartfelt conversation was all it took to fix every issue this family had. Look at them! They're all so happy together. They were getting divorced like a week ago. Movie magic, I guess, but I just wanted to see a little more about what the repair looks like and what kind of work goes into fixing generational trauma this deep. Because, you know, this shit's genetic, right?
Once upon a time, not so long ago, in 2013 at Emory University School of Medicine, there lived some mice. Now, these mice were living their fun mice life until one day a scientist said, "Here, smell these cherry blossoms," and then gave them an electric shock. The scientist did this over and over and over until the poor mice were terrified of the smell of cherry blossoms. The scientists later found out that these mice had developed big old smell receptors for cherry blossoms in their brain. Even the smallest whiff of cherry blossoms would send them into a panic. With their new weird fear established, the mice went on to have families of their own, and their kids and even their grandkids had these same huge smell receptors. And you know what else? They were just as afraid of the same smell. Just a spritz would send them into the same panic that their granddad showed, even though they had never experienced the electric shock themselves.
The moral of this story? It's crazy what our parents can give us biologically. And those pathways are extremely complex. And we're just beginning to understand how deep this rabbit hole goes. That moral isn't lost and undone. What genetic, quote, gifts we receive are central to the story. All right, spoiling time again. I'm skipping over a lot of details in the summary, so if any of the story or the imagery is interesting to you, definitely check it out after the video. There's still a lot more to discover. Our main character is Alma. She'll get into a car accident soon, and she'll start seeing her dead father. He'll want to train her to go back in time and keep him from getting murdered, but let's back up to the beginning. Where Evelyn began her journey constantly overwhelmed, Alma could not differ more.
I'm so bored of living.
Alma's underwhelmed by life. Daily routine is a disappointment. Prior to the story, we know she's experienced some real lows and even been unsure whether to remain in this life. But she's always been resistant to seeking help. It runs in her family. Her grandmother, Geraldine, spent most of her adult life in psychiatric hospitals due to schizophrenia. Alma's dad, Jacob, that's Geraldine's son, loved his mom so much that he devoted his life's work to saving her. He became a professor of theoretical physics, believing that her condition went beyond the mental into intangible aspects of the universe. He believed his work could somehow save her, and so it was this father, obsessed with his research, that took Alma out for trick-or-treating one Halloween. When the lab called, so did his obsession, and he left her there on the street corner to wait for him. Later that night, he and his lab assistant died in a car accident. It was this Alma who grew up without her father that's bored of living. She found that she could never figure out how to speak the same language as her mother, Camila. Sometimes even literally, since Camila immigrated from Mexico to be with Jacob. And after his death, she had 2 kids to raise on her own. Alma's sister Becca is dedicated to pursuing normality, something to prove to herself that she's not damaged by her past, that she can still be successful. And she's doing it. She just got engaged to marry this guy.
But sometimes I like to look at pictures of birds.
He means well. Then the car accident happens. When she wakes up, her sister Becca and her mother Camila are both annoyed with her for her recklessness. And she also sees her father in the room, but she's the only one who can see him. Is she going crazy? Is this the same schizophrenia that runs in the family that Geraldine had?
Well, yes and no. I mean, your grandmother, she didn't lose her mind. She just lost her way back to reality.
Yeah, it's a little hard to explain. Alma relives her memories more vividly than most of us. They're so real to her that she can re-experience them fully and, with training, actually change the experience, changing the past in the process.
Even feelings you don't remember take up residence.
Is that me with your mom? I met Geraldine?
Yeah, even feelings from your lineage. My feelings.
In Geraldine, the doctors diagnosed this as schizophrenia, but she was just literally lost in her memories. With these powers, Alma could go back in time. Her father's death could be undone, and she could grow up with a dad. Alma agrees, not only to save him, but also
A life that doesn't follow a paint-by-numbers timeline.
as a cure for her boredom with life, to become, like Jobu Tabaki, magnificent. Like everything everywhere, the sci-fi premise is just a form of wish fulfillment. What if I didn't go to the US and instead fulfilled my potential to be a famous kung fu movie star? What if my father never died and I got to grow up with him right there? Both pieces are about how the decisions of yesterday are affecting today, and both pieces deal in regret. Not only our regret, but our parents' regret. When Alma goes back in time to save her father Jacob, she learns he wasn't murdered. Jacob's obsession with saving his own mother, Geraldine, and unlocking the secrets of these abilities was ruining his work, his marriage, his life. And when that obsession caused him to lose it all, he lost himself. No one murdered him. He drove himself and his lab assistant over the cliff that night. He'd taken his life, just as Alma had tried to once. But it's not over yet. Remember, it's a time travel story. Alma's able to convince her dead father to change his choices. When the call from the lab comes that Halloween night, he ignores it this time and takes her home. Season 2 is about Alma's family in this alternate timeline where Jacob lived. And it's great. Her father's alive, her sister's recently married on her honeymoon.
Is that your sister?
Uh-huh.
Tell her Bora Bora is Bora boring without her.
She can speak Spanish now.
No me digas, hablo español? Sí, hablo español.
Her mother is crying. Okay, that part is weird. So Alma decides to try to help her mom. She enlists Becca, who had abilities this whole time and didn't say anything. Becca, why are you holding out on us? Alma and Becca begin to believe their mother is having an affair after witnessing some suspicious goings-on.
No, Alejandro, you need to go now. Mom, who was that?
But accusing her sends her into a rage, and she decides to leave, not even telling her family where she's going. Becca and Alma decide she's probably gone back home to Mexico, and they follow her. In Mexico, they explore her mother's past. They learn she had a boyfriend before her father. He was a priest, so their love was forbidden. And when her family found out, they disowned her. But she got pregnant, and not sure what else to do, she left home and ended up staying with Senora Alejandro, a curandera, and she rules.
Coincidence is just the universe nudging you in the right direction.
Did you get that from a meme?
Yes.
Camila decides to name her son after this woman who saved her life, Alejandro. This is the same Alejandro that she yelled at back in the States. He just wanted to meet his sister. When they finally track Camila down and meet Alejandro, they ask her,
How come you never told us about Alejandro?
When Camila moved to the States to be with Jacob, she became very close to her new mother-in-law, Geraldine.
My mom saw herself in Camila, a young immigrant making a new life.
When Camila was pregnant with their first child, it seemed like the right time to finally tell her husband about the past and maybe even adopt little Alejandro into their new family. But she was nervous and she thought Geraldine would have some helpful perspective. Geraldine surprised her though.
I think it's better if you leave him. That was a different you. Forget her. Forget everything she did.
Having learned all this, Alma, as always, knows exactly what she wants to do.
What if all we have to do is go back and stop Geraldine from telling Mom not to adopt Alejandro?
So she convinces them to go and find out what would make Geraldine believe that forgetting your past is the best thing you can do for yourself. And they learn about Geraldine's past. Well, not Geraldine, but Lotl. That was her name when she was a little girl in Poland. Of all the characters in Undone, Lochl's story hurt the most. I actually kept having to stop writing this essay to take crying breaks because of her. My own Jewish ancestors immigrated to the US from Russia in the early 1880s. The exact reasons why are lost to time, but the timing and place makes us think it's more than likely they came to the US to escape the pogroms happening in Russia at the time. Pogroms were an outbreak of violence towards any minority group, though I've heard them mostly used to describe violence towards Jewish communities in Eastern Europe. If you were a Jew caught up in a pogrom, your neighbor might break down your door, destroy your home, beat you, do unspeakable things to your wife and daughters, and there would be no repercussions. The authorities might even have been the ones doing the beatings. This is the kind of violence we watched Geraldine's family get caught up in. 1946 in Poland hosts one of history's worst pogroms, the Kielce pogrom. One day, a Polish officer asked Ruckel's mother to use their family's powers to see into his future. When he didn't like her answer, he took his revenge as soon as violence broke out. Ruckel watched it happen while hiding in a shed, just after using her own powers to see that this is exactly what was going to happen soon. And she blamed herself. She left part of herself in that shed that day, rejecting her past completely, even going so far as to change her name when arriving in the US.
You? Who are you?
Geraldine.
And then she grew up and had a family of her own. By rejecting young Ruckel, getting angry at the child, she was angry at herself every time that little girl crossed her mind. That anger and that trauma got diagnosed as schizophrenia, and she spent her days in and out of psych wards, keeping her away from her children. That didn't stop her son Jacob from loving her any less. In fact,
Jacob! My boys!
I made you something.
It's beautiful.
It's a bracelet. It has special powers to make me feel happy, so you don't have to ever come back here.
I love it. I always knew you'd save me.
He only became more determined to save his mom. There's one scene that destroys me every time I watch it. Geraldine, in a rage at these doggone spirits showing up in her brain all the time, throws a broom at the TV while her children were watching it. It terrifies them. Of course it does. She's screwed up again, another outburst, and she knows she's going away to the psych ward, away from her boys. And then...
Jacob, what are you doing?
Look, when Dad comes home, I'll tell him I was playing and broke the TV. Because if he doesn't find out you broke it, it won't have to go away again, right?
You got a plan for everything, huh? I know I do things that you don't understand, but just know that your mama is always there deep down. I just get a little mixed up.
If only the people who loved us could be so self-aware about their own struggles, right? But we all know it doesn't always go like that. And even more tragic, it doesn't dissuade Jacob from his desire to save her. A decision that ends with him driving off a cliff, leaving his daughters alone. Watching the scene of a Jewish immigrant who survived some of the same experiences as my own ancestors made this hit a lot closer to home than I think it would have otherwise. And to be honest with you, I can't totally explain why. There's something indefinable about Ruchel's particular brand of helplessness, or Jacob's blind obsession to find an answer, or Alma's disaffected apathy towards life. And I don't think you have to be Jewish to feel the same resonance I experienced, but I wonder if maybe it helps. We know that cultural context is a huge factor in how generational trauma manifests, so maybe Ruchel or Jacob or Alma don't resonate with you at all. In which case, don't worry. I got plenty more flavors of generational trauma for you to try. Let's go! Camila's experiences with both her biological and adopted mother deeply affect her children. When Camila's mother disowned her during her pregnancy, she learned that this child was something to be ashamed of. When her adoptive mother, Geraldine, told her to leave him behind to forget the past, that shame got reinforced. Then when we finally meet this child, Alejandro, the first thing we learn is that he's a great guy and everyone who meets him seems to love him. When he left the orphanage at 18, the director filling out his paperwork said she always thought he'd choose to work with children because he's so great with them. But there's this deeply revealing moment in the story when Camila is taking care of Alejandro after a cold.
¿Cuándo te conseguirás una esposa que te cuide?
No me interesan las mujeres.
Camila wants to know why Alejandro hasn't found himself someone yet. Alejandro takes this opportunity to tell his mom that he's gay.
Entonces un esposo.
No sé. Soy muy tímido para las relaciones.
¿Por qué? Eres maravilloso.
Camila doesn't miss a beat and says, okay, a husband then. But Alejandro is shy about relationships and he's just not sure he's ready.
Quiero estar perfectos cuando me acerque a alguien en serio.
Creo que ya eres perfecto ahora.
Gracias.
Camila wants to know why. He's so wonderful. Alejandro responds that he wants to be his best self when he approaches someone. Camila tries to tell him that he's perfect right now, and Alejandro says thank you, but I imagine Alejandro feels a lot like Joy did when her mom finally introduced her girlfriend to Gong Gong. The attention is there, but it just feels wrong. How can Camila say that when she's spent his entire life hiding him? How can he approach a guy at a bar when he's been told not to approach his own sister?
No, Alejandro, you need to go now.
Like with Joy, there's a lifetime of evidence going against this one good act. How could it feel genuine, even if it is? By the way, this is not to say that you need to be in a relationship to be happy. Not at all. Alejandro's words indicate that it's not that he wants to be single, it's that he doesn't feel like he's his best self. But everyone likes him. He has no reason to feel that way other than those his mother gave him with her own actions. As understandable as her actions were, the hurt doesn't necessarily go away. After the sisters changed the timeline again so that Alejandro had always grown up with Becca and Alma as a loving older brother, he doesn't seem to have the same hesitation. He has a boyfriend. Maybe even a fiancé. By the time Alma and Becca find Senora Alejandro, Becca's exhausted. Her mom is nowhere to be found, and she just discovered she has these new superpowers. And I didn't mention this, but she's in a huge fight with her new husband, Reed, about whether or not to have a baby. Reed wants to start a family ASAP, but Becca's hesitating and she can't quite explain why. All this turmoil leads her to collapse in exhaustion at the curandera's front door. This sends Becca on a mental journey. In and out of a trance-like state, she keeps hearing a baby crying. She's transported to a memory of herself as a child holding a baby doll. She unknowingly watches her mother tell Alejandro he can't call her at home anymore. She experiences her mother's memory of holding Alejandro for the first time, of giving him away. She feels the agony that her mother felt. Generational trauma can get kind of spooky. Becca's uncertainty about having a baby mirrors her mother's own uncertainty about her first child. Becca's conflicted feelings mirrors the conflict Camila feels today, and these struggles we see Becca experience through her mother were, of course, caused by Camila's own maternal relationships. Now, let's be clear. I'm not saying that generational trauma is metaphysical, time-space continuum, crazy sci-fi magic. Reading about it, I found a lot of examples of how a parent or grandparent's history echoes what a child is going through. Just like baby mice having no reason to be afraid of cherry blossoms, but recoiling in fear anyway. It's not magic, it's just that the combination of our biology and psychology creates opportunities for these responses to repeat themselves in ways that, at the time, can feel inexplicable. But if we consider what our parents went through, start to make more sense. It can feel a little deterministic. Becca will doubt having a child with whoever she marries, no matter what, right? I assure you, we are not doomed. Senora Alejandro explains it best.
You reflect her, but you are not her. Once you understand yourself, you will know what you want.
If there's a character or two in Undone or Everything Everywhere that you found yourself relating to, you might now be wondering, how do I fix my generational trauma? Is it go figure out your family history and reckon with it by any means necessary? We can't always talk to our family. Some are no longer with us, some are abusive, some don't accept us for who we are, and some are just plain exhausting and not worth it. The good news here is, learning your own family history can be helpful, sure, but it's not mandatory. Not in my opinion, and I think Undone agrees with me. Alma tries to fix her own tragic past. She's able to undo the worst thing that's ever happened to her. Her father rejects his obsession and doesn't drive off that cliff, but it doesn't actually fix anything. After learning about Ruchel's past, Jacob sees another opportunity to save his mother, and he leaps at it, attempting to recreate the same magic trick. Where he changed his decision that Halloween night, he tries to change the family's mind. They should all go hide from that Polish officer in the shed. When that doesn't work, he attempts to change the officer's mind. He does this at the expense of his own health. He will not stop trying until his mom stops him. This is the other scene that wrecks me. Jacob's an adult now, but he's still that little boy, kneeling in front of his mother, trying anything to save her. But she finally stops him.
Can't fix this, Jacob. No one can heal this.
No one can undo the mass violence against Jewish people during the pogroms, or the devastation to indigenous peoples and their culture by colonists, or impossible cultural expectations throughout history, or slavery, the Depression, war, 9/11, Hurricane Katrina, or any other trauma that might be lurking in your family's history. Whether genetic or not, your family's experiences will touch your life. Jacob can never save his mother. These things can never be undone. All we can do is face ourselves. And that's what Geraldine shows us how to do, as she turns to this younger version of herself.
God, I was so young.
All we can do is try to find the right thing to say to soothe the version of ourselves that's still back there in that impossible situation.
I know how sad and angry you are. You just want Mama and Papa back. But there was nothing you could have done to save them.
All we can do is accept ourselves.
Now we have a family of our own. An incredible, loving family who would do anything for us. And you're part of it.
Every single version.
Really?
Really.
This is the same conclusion that Everything Everywhere gives us. Evelyn sees every version of herself and accepts them all as part of her. And when she does that, she begins to heal. Now, that's so much easier said than done. I'm asking a lot from you right now. I'm asking you to be magnificent. We must be magnificent. The weight of our forebears is heavy, and every day we lift it when we get out of bed. If we don't, it will crush us. When we're too depressed to get out of bed in the morning, that's the weight pinning us down. When your heart is too heavy for your body to move, the whisper of nihilism becomes seductive. If nothing existed, there'd be no weight. If I didn't exist, I wouldn't feel so heavy. Maybe you've been lifting this weight every morning for many, many mornings. And it's been tiring. And though you might have thrown out your back a few times, you've also grown strong. You might not even have noticed how strong. You go on in life and you face more trials, more hard moments. Echoes of the pain your forebears felt make themselves clear to you, and the weight grows a little heavier. And yet, you've persisted. Each day a little heavier, each day a little stronger, each day more tired. When you began, your weight was light. And at first, you didn't feel much, but over time you were given more weight to carry. Often by someone you trusted, someone who you thought wanted to protect you, someone you love. But instead of helping you, they give you more to carry. It happens in a moment when their own weight they've been carrying overwhelms them. Their love becomes distant, and your world becomes uncertain. And in a moment when you hope they'll steady that ground, they make things worse. Or maybe you took the burden from them without them even having to ask, because you love them just as much as they love you. And somewhere within your tiny heart, you know, if they didn't have that weight right now, it would be easier for them to show you the love that you know they have for you. And you love them. And you don't even know how to be safe without them. So you gladly take it on. Regardless, it's your weight now. You envelop it. You stretch your skin over it because it's part of you now. And you're heavier. And you grow up and you meet new people and you love new people. And for you, love feels like taking on more weight. So you allow yourself to become heavier each day, more tired each day, because that's love, right? It's bleak, I know. But what if I told you there's a secret that can protect you? To learn the secret, you must be kind. Kind enough to put aside the anger towards the loved ones whose weight you carry. Kind enough to put aside anger towards yourself for taking it all on. To learn the secret, you must be wise. Wise enough to know that blame will not ease your heavy heart, and wise enough to recognize what it feels like when you're about to take something on that isn't yours to carry. To learn the secret, you must be brave. Brave enough to try a new kind of love that might feel alien to you. Brave enough to refuse someone else's burden and know that you are still worthy of love. To learn this secret, you must be magnificent. And you may say to me, what if I'm not magnificent? But I'll say to you, if anything I've said today resonated with you, if you know the weight I'm talking about, and you've carried it all the way here just to listen to the sound of my voice, you've been kind enough, wise enough, and brave enough. And I know you must be magnificent. And so I know you're ready for this secret. While the weight, the trauma we carry has made becoming magnificent a necessity for our survival. We don't need our trauma to be magnificent. We never did. Trauma doesn't make you magnificent. Trauma requires you to already be magnificent. Hear me when I say this, because it is a common mistake we make. The tortured artist, the depressed comedian, we think about our greatest gifts as outcomes of our worst experiences. And this couldn't be less true. Our greatest gifts were always with us, and they're our greatest ally when confronting our worst experiences. When we were young, they told us that growing up was all about becoming responsible and carrying your own weight. And that's true, but it's not the whole truth, because growing up is also about learning what was never really ours to carry. Thank you so much for watching, and a special thank you to everybody who helped me put this essay together. Thanks to Panzer and Lotl for lending your voices and talents, and thanks to Jusagi, Clare, and of course Catburger for sharing your thoughts, ideas, and feedback during the writing process. Respect.